Late last night, New York and the union representing corrections officers reached a deal to end prison strikes that have lasted nearly 2 weeks. But the union didn't authorize those strikes to begin with. So the question now, will the COs come back to work? We look at the terms of the deal and what conditions have been like inside the prisons during the strike for inmates and for staff on today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Clarkson University, offering over 95 programs of study with campuses in the Hudson Valley, Central, and Northern New York. More at clarkson.edu.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Friday, February 28th. The corrections officers who were on strike won several key concessions: a temporary bump in overtime pay, a potential change in pay scale, and a temporary suspension of parts of the HALT Act, which has limited the use of solitary confinement in state prisons. COs say the HALT Act has made prisons less safe. Advocates say its suspension now puts incarcerated people in more danger and continues an inhumane practice. Our prisons reporter Emily Russell unpacked the whole deal this morning with Catherine Wheeler on Northern Light.
So I was at the strike outside Adirondack Correctional for about an hour yesterday, talking to groups of COs, and they all said that the HALT Act was their biggest issue. It puts a 15-day limit on solitary confinement, and COs say that's just too short. They say it's just not enough of a deterrent for inmates who are violent or using drugs or violating other rules in prison. And I should note, we're not going to hear any of the voices of the COs I talked to yesterday because the strike is illegal, so everyone declined to be interviewed on tape.
Okay, and on that note, since the agreement was struck between the state and the union and not the striking officers, how done exactly is this deal?
That's something we'll just have to wait and see. The agreement requires corrections officers to return to work by tomorrow, Saturday, to avoid facing disciplinary action for striking. That means that they, and as in every individual striking officer, essentially has to decide today whether they will take the deal.
All right. So how does this deal address the concerns of corrections officers, particularly in relation to the HALT Act?
So the deal creates this 90-day window where the HALT Act is basically put on hold. So corrections officers will be able to put incarcerated people into solitary confinement for longer than the 15-day limit. Advocates say this temporary suspension of the HALT Act is illegal and that solitary confinement is inhumane. So there's that 90-day suspension window. But the deal also says that a month from now, the state's Department of Corrections will start to really evaluate on a broader level whether to reinstate the HALT Act or if it should remain suspended.
And Emily, another big focus of the strikes was staffing prison levels. What did the COs you talked to yesterday say about that? And how does that deal address those concerns?
So there's been a statewide staffing shortage in prisons for years. And the guys outside Adirondack Correctional say it's really taken a toll on them. I talked to a few of them who said they've been forced to work 24-hour shifts. One guy said he had to work a 32-hour shift once. And there have been times when the prison has been so tight on staffing that COs told me there's like no backup. Like if there was some kind of emergency there, they wouldn't have any extra staff to help out. So this deal that was struck last night basically gets rid of 24-hour shifts. If a prison is low on staff, it won't force workers to work overtime. Instead, it will cancel programming for incarcerated people and offer voluntary overtime to officers. And then the deal also creates a committee to study staffing levels at each state prison.
So it's still early, and this deal was just released late last night. But Emily, from your experience yesterday, what's your broad takeaway from the strike and the deal that's been reached?
Well, it was really clear yesterday that corrections officers are fed up with the state's prison system. They feel like they're being pushed to their limits. They're being asked to work too much, not being given enough authority to discipline incarcerated people. And this deal addresses some of their key concerns, but it doesn't do it in a permanent way. Like with the HALT Act, I don't think we'll know how this all plays out and how satisfied COs will be until that 90-day suspension window is over. The guys I talked to didn't want the HALT Act repealed. They just wanted it reworked, and they wanted it done in a way that reflects the concerns of COs at prisons all across the state. And the other thing that was clear yesterday is that there's a real divide between the COs and the union that represents them. And as a reminder, the strike was not sanctioned by the union. And the guys I talked to yesterday say they didn't feel like the union had their backs and could really make the changes they felt were needed to make prisons safer. But it was the union that was negotiating this deal with the state. So first off, we'll just have to see if corrections officers on strike even accept this deal and go back to work tomorrow. And then we'll have to see how the changes and proposals in the deal play out over the next few months.
That was our Adirondacks and prison reporter Emily Russell speaking with Catherine Wheeler this morning on Northern Light. Since the strike began, 4 inmates have died, 2 in Sing Sing and 2 in Auburn. Prisons have been on lockdown and severely understaffed for nearly 2 weeks now. And that has big implications for the incarcerated people and the staff left inside. Amy Feiereisel reports.
What lockdown means is inmates are confined to their cells or dorms pretty much 24/7. And that means they're reliant on staff to bring them food, medicine, and medical attention. But for the first few days of the strike, there were very few people to do that. The state says 90% of roughly 15,000 corrections officers have walked off the job.
It was rough because there was no one there. No one. He said everyone was gone.
Angela's husband is in a maximum security prison in New York State. For most of the people in this story, I'll be using just first names because of security concerns or fear of retaliation.
He said they weren't giving him food or water, and they were coming in to pass only meds for the people that had mental health issues, like people that have diabetes and stuff just wasn't getting in it.
Access to health care and mental health resources are big concerns of inmate advocates. Since the strike began, the Legal Aid Society says it's gotten dozens of reports of incarcerated people unable to access medical care and medication. Meanwhile, the few corrections officers who aren't striking are running on fumes. I spoke with a woman who lives in northern New York whose son is a CO.
He went in for his regular shift and called me and said, "I'm not coming home." He's exhausted. He's frustrated. None of them are sleeping. The stress levels are ridiculous.
Prisons were already understaffed. This is more like a skeleton crew. And it includes civilian workers who aren't on strike, like nurses, social workers, parole officers, psychologists. They've taken on a lot of work that they don't normally do and aren't trained for. That's according to Wayne Spence, the president of their labor union, the Public Employees Federation. Spence says that looks like parole officers being tasked with breaking up fights, nurses having to deliver medicine, when normally a CO would escort the inmate to them.
Some of the nurses and other civilians have had to run what I call a gauntlet and navigate fecal matter and urine being thrown at them. From Monday to Sunday, my members were really put in some really tough positions.
Sunday is when the Public Employees Federation got the state to agree that its employees wouldn't have to do work without security of either remaining COs or members of the National Guard. That's the other group inside. Governor Hochul deployed the National Guard to prisons last Wednesday. Spence says that's changed things for civilian workers.
We're starting to see that our members are not being forced or coerced or threatened into doing work that they shouldn't do.
The inmates and their loved ones I spoke with said basic living conditions definitely improved with the arrival of the National Guard. More food, hot food, mail delivery.
They finally got out to showers and were able to get to the kiosks.
Aaron has a son incarcerated at Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora.
But he also said that the way the National Guard is treating them is very different. The guys need something, they make it happen. They're more organized. And he said that was just huge to finally feel human again.
That was a sentiment I heard from lots of people, including Atik Weston at Woodburn Correctional Facility. He spoke with Radio Catskill this week.
They speak to you like human beings. They don't talk down on you. It's not like the degrading treatment like you had to get used to as being a prisoner. It feels good finally to deal with people that respect you on that level.
But the National Guard isn't trained for this work. Wayne Spence from the Public Employees Federation says his member employees have been concerned for them.
I've heard from nurses who said that some of the guardsmen are 19 and 20 years old, and they felt that they have to protect them.
That was Amy Feiereisel reporting. You can find more on conditions inside the prisons and more on the potential deal struck between the state and the Corrections Officers Union on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by B. Children of Canton and Mark Corey of Watertown. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.